Mr. Basana definitely gave me some things to think about. I think one of the eye-opening things that I see, now I'm not in cybersecurity, but I am in the digital space, and I'm always educating about e-commerce, digital marketing, data research, and stuff like that. So whenever I see companies trying to hire for digital marketing specialists or e-commerce specialists, the job description would read like, you gotta be a digital strategist, you gotta be a videographer, you have to lift 60 pounds, you gotta fight Thanos. It's a combination of everything. They want you to be Superman, but they wanna pay you like Superman as well. You know Superman was broke. Anywho, so inclusive of economic development. Inclusive economic development aims to ensure that the jobs created in dynamic industries are accessible to members of historically overlooked communities, and that the jobs themselves are good jobs. Models for equitable growth require overcoming barriers to employment. In a regional economy, both in terms of skills on the supply side, but also the cultural barriers, such as long-standing narratives about the ability of traditionally disconnected communities to meet employers' labor needs. Our next panel discussion, moderated by David Moreno, will discuss regional approaches to workforce development. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. David Moreno and our panelists. Now, in the meantime, they're getting mic'd up right now, they're getting set up. We actually have a purse that was left behind during lunch, and that is from Mrs. Astrid Pacheco. Is Mrs. Astrid Pacheco here? Does anybody know? Oh, yes? Okay, your purse is in the back? No problem. See? Got to solve a big problem here today. So they're getting mic'd up, and they're going to be coming on stage. How are we enjoying day 2 so far? Good? That's what we're talking about. Is anybody having this problem where after lunch, the button's not going back? Anybody else having that? It's not going back, I tried. Do we need headsets for this panel? Yes, okay. So this is going to be in Spanish, I believe. If everybody who needs the translation, if we can go to the back of the room and get our headsets, and then we can return back. We could do that in the meantime whilst our panelists are getting mic'd up. So we can head to the back, grab our headsets. And we are good to go. So ladies and gentlemen, give a warm round of applause for Mr. David Moreno. And he will have the pleasure of introducing the panelists for this discussion.
Thank you, Karan. And sorry for this small delay, we're getting mic'd. Thank you, everyone, for staying here until almost the end. We're getting there. This panel is going to be both in English and Spanish. I'm going to try to speak most of the time in English, but some of the participants will be speaking Spanish. So, yeah, I see people already getting their headsets. In today's rapidly evolving landscape, a skilled and adaptable workforce is a cornerstone of a nation's progress and resilience. Workforce development, it is not just a local concern. It is a matter of regional significance, with diverse countries and regions facing their own unique challenges and opportunities. This panel is called Regional Approaches to Workforce Development, and with me, please welcome to Maurice Ken, Donavon Johnson, and Nataly Buslon. Maurice is Deputy Team Lead in Cybersecurity Capacity Building in USAID. In the Technology Division of the Democracy, Development, and Innovation Bureau. He oversees global cybersecurity capacity building, support to government and non-government partners across a range of sectors, including management of Digital Apex, one of USAID's primary capacity building program. Dr. Johnson is an assistant professor of public policy and administration at Florida International University and former data scientist with the Ministry of National Security in Jamaica. He's a Fulbright scholar from the Global South with dynamic research interests. One tranche of his interests examines the consequences of administrative burdens, bureaucratic encounters, and policy making. The second tranche of his research focuses on intersecting research and practice on technology and governance, where he examines issues such as cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Nataly Buslon, doctor in sociology from the University of Barcelona and postdoctorate at the Barcelona Supercomputer Center, specializing in the social impact of artificial intelligence. Visiting researcher at Stanford University and Columbia University. Currently, she is a senior advisor consultant at UN Women and an advisor member at the Inter-American Development Bank on responsible artificial intelligence, gender diversity, and human rights. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start with Donavon. What do you think that are the key consideration to coordinate national cybersecurity workforce development, and how can these efforts can be adapted to suit the unique needs of different countries within the different regions?
Thanks, David, and welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. I think from where I sit, one of the most important parts or elements of cybersecurity when we're talking about workforce development specifically is that a country should have some degree of centralized posture for cybersecurity. When we do that, we ensure that cybersecurity is not an afterthought. It's not something that is tacked on to some already existing structure, but that there is some centralization, there is a national cybersecurity lead. When you do that, you put in place the considerations of what is required for cybersecurity workforce development. You are then able to identify what skills are missing, because everything is centralized, right? Everything is in one place, so we can see the landscape of cybersecurity across the country, and therefore we can see the gaps, we can see what is missing, and where we need to plug the gaps. Secondly, there needs to be greater partnerships between academia and all involved in cybersecurity. And why is this important? And that partnership particularly must include the private sector, because ultimately, for workforce development, we're talking about education and training. And if we're going to train, we need to have an end goal. Who and what are we training for? To what end? And so with that partnership, you can devise a workforce development strategy that includes curriculum, pedagogy, as to what we're looking forward to when we're developing our workforce. Because one of the things that fetter cybersecurity workforce development in the region is that cybersecurity talent is outsourced predominantly in many situations. And that is because local institutions have not been prepared or have not prepared themselves with the local human resources to respond to cybersecurity issues. And so once you have that centralized posture as a key consideration in workforce development, and that also translates into partnerships around what skills are needed, where the gaps are, and we plug those gaps. And of course, we need money. Any form of coordination of developing workforce requires equity. There are resource intensive activities that have to be considered when we're thinking about cybersecurity workforce development. And so that forms part of one of the key pillars of cybersecurity workforce development. Importantly as well, and this is sort of on the far end, is that there needs to be policy and legislation that supports that, right? The presence of policy signals a clear commitment, policy and legislation that supports cybersecurity. It signals a commitment of any government that we're interested in this thing. And that commitment attracts investment. the investment that will take care of the funding part, the investment that helps to build out academic institutions that can support the education and training that then filters down into your workforce development, right? And a key consideration, and we're talking about the Caribbean and Latin American context here, a key consideration when we're talking about coordination of national workforce development is culture. Developing the cybersecurity workforce must contemplate the importance and the salience of culture as an enabler or a challenge, a hurdle in cybersecurity workforce development. The workforce must be willing to approach cybersecurity education and cybersecurity development. Each individual must also be willing to approach, to become a better cyber citizen, so to speak. Because whether or not we want to accept it, the world is moving in that direction. And so if the culture does not embrace this idea that we're moving in a digital direction and we each play a very pivotal role in this entire cybersecurity project, then we'll have resistance and the workforce won't develop at the pace that we want it to develop. Of course, you can force your employees to take cybersecurity training, but consider how much better it would be if they approach it willingly and if they embrace it and if it becomes a part of the cultural considerations around cybersecurity. And so those things, I believe, are very important considerations when we're thinking about the national development or coordinating national cybersecurity workforce development.
You're saying that we cannot force your workers to approach the digitalization in a way that they might not be able to do, but at some point the pandemic forced all of us and broke all the barriers, or many barriers regarding digitalization. We were like teleworking or distance learning. Those were concepts that we had before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, they're here and they're going to stay. Other key points of your answer, like the decentralized approach, I think it's very important. We talked yesterday about the importance of the different, how the region now is more mature and most of the countries have national strategies in place. Now, some of them, we're working with them, they're putting in place workforce development strategies to national workforce development strategies. So that is very, very important. Of course, the partnership between with the private sector, which is it is very, very key. Nataly, voy a cambiar al español para preguntarte a ti, ¿por qué crees que es relevante tener una fuerza laboral multidisciplinaria y diversa en los equipos y en los trabajos de ciberseguridad?
Bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación a este gran simposio. Bueno, como hemos estado hablando, incluso decía Donavon, digamos, tenemos que dar respuesta a los problemas sociales. En realidad los equipos diversos son fundamentales. Voy a decir 5 puntos por los que considero. Primero, bueno, obviamente, si queremos tener respuestas innovadoras y eficientes a la ciberseguridad y los problemas que están pasando, necesitamos puntos de vista diversos. Esto es algo ya estudiado científicamente en muchos papers. De hecho, manifestar que, por ejemplo, las grandes universidades en el mundo, como Harvard, MIT, Stanford, etcétera, desde hace muchísimos años tienen departamentos específicos para atraer la diversidad a sus estudiantes, porque como ya saben, esto es lo que da la eficiencia y la calidad de su educación, de su currículum. Entonces, es necesario en ciberseguridad tener esta representación de la sociedad para adelantarnos. Si lo que queremos es buscar soluciones a problemas que están pasando de personas que son delincuentes o que están haciendo cosas incorrectas, debemos justamente pensar un poco de forma contextual y eso se logra a través de una fuerza diversa. Después otro punto es, que no es el más adecuado, pero si económicamente el Banco Mundial ya ha dicho que va a haber una pérdida del Producto Bruto Interno si no se incorpora la diversidad es decir, de grupos minoritarios y no minoritarios como las mujeres, que somos el 50% de la población. Si no hay una incorporación de mujeres y de minorías, claramente va a haber un déficit de fuerza laboral en las áreas STEM, ¿no? Ciencias, tecnologías y todo lo que tiene que ver obviamente con ciberseguridad. Entonces, eso es algo clave que a veces a las personas porque otros factores son los derechos humanos. Todas las personas, según los derechos humanos, tenemos el derecho de participar en el conocimiento y en las áreas científicas. Entonces, apartar a determinada población es ir contra los derechos humanos. Después también es un tema de responsabilidad corporativa. Digamos, todas las empresas se nos exige cumplir con ciertos estándares y dentro de ellos está la diversidad, el plan de género, tener determinados protocolos, etc. Después, en algunos países, digo esto porque como hemos estado hablando en estos días, hay algunos países que tienen regulación y otros no, pero por ejemplo en Europa, todos los proyectos financiados por la Unión Europea exigen que la mano de obra, digamos, de los equipos sean diversos. Si no hay diversidad, no se financia. Y cuando estamos hablando de diversidad, no hablamos de tener solamente mujeres en el equipo, sino de que estén a mando de tomar decisiones. Porque de nada sirve tener personas diversas si no le damos voz, ¿vale? Entonces, esos serían los 5 elementos, digamos, ¿por qué, no? De los derechos humanos, de responsabilidad corporativa, de obviamente es eficiente, innovador y es contextual, y obviamente también legal. Y esto depende de cada país. Creo que hoy lo hablábamos, en Colombia tal vez no, en Uruguay todavía, por ejemplo, no es obligatorio tener planes de igualdad, pero a futuro considero que los agentes y los gobiernos cada vez van a exigir más como una acción afirmativa, ¿no? Se le llama acciones afirmativas, que hay posiciones contra, hay gente que está en contra o no. Yo considero que las acciones afirmativas son positivas a la realidad que vivimos, que es desigual. No es una solución. Ojalá no tendría que haber obligaciones de incluir personas. Ojalá el mundo fuera inclusivo ya de por sí. Entonces, que eso potenciará obviamente las respuestas más eficientes y que anticipen los problemas que tenemos en ciberseguridad.
Realmente es un tema controvertido. No tanto en este escenario, por lo que parece, pero me ha gustado mucho tu reflexión y los diferentes puntos que estabas tocando, porque has pasado de unos puntos como que tienen que ver más con principios éticos y morales, como los derechos humanos, la responsabilidad social corporativa, a otros que son más puramente económicos, ¿no? Es que si no incluimos la diversidad, si no incluimos mano o fuerza laboral diversa, vamos a tener un impacto económico y el PIB de los países va a decrecer. Dependiendo de según quién sea nuestra audiencia, tú nos has dado unas cuantas herramientas que podemos utilizar pues para hablar, dependiendo de cuál sea nuestro interlocutor, para darles unas razones u otras en un tema que parece que por lo menos en esta sala tenemos unanimidad y estamos todos de acuerdo y remando en la misma dirección. Maurice, I would like to switch to English and ask you what transferable lessons can be gleaned from individual country efforts regarding cybersecurity workforce development?
Thanks for the question, David, and thanks everybody for still being here. Much appreciated. So approaching the challenge of cybersecurity workforce development and emphasizing cybersecurity, because I'll explain a little bit more in a second, why to emphasize that. From the role of like a major global assistance donor, foreign assistance donor, I think there's a lot, we work as an agency globally. We have missions in 70-something countries. We work in about another 20 where we don't have missions, I think. And so we are conducting activities in partnership with governments and societies in those countries. In some cases on cybersecurity, and in other cases in other sectors, on capacity building, on workforce development, on training, on emergency response, on all those different things. Clearly, there are lessons to be shared between each of those activities. I think one major takeaway from that, though, is that cybersecurity as a whole is both unique and not unique as a challenge. It's a huge issue, and I think, Donavon, you touched on this a little bit, the other panelists touched on this, you touched on this as well, Nataly. If we're talking about workforce capacity development and cybersecurity capacity development within a society, there's the expertise side. Are we training the right number of experts? Are they going to the right place? Can governments maintain expertise? But then there's also the societal element of, are we pushing digital hygiene across an entire society and that sort of thing? And cybersecurity is just, it's a huge issue that trying to, eat the entire apple at once is really difficult, so to speak. And so it's just one challenge, right? I think it's one of many challenges that are shared everywhere. There might be nuanced by country or by region, but overall, the individual facets of cybersecurity as a capacity building issue, they're shared everywhere. The other element of that, I think, is, and which is why I emphasize cybersecurity workforce development, is that there's this whole other workforce capacity development field that at least USAID and other donors have been working on in other sectors for decades. We've worked in energy capacity, we've worked in health, we've worked in finance, and all of those also have workforce development capacity challenges that we can run into. And so I think trying to find tools from other sectors and bringing those into the cybersecurity space, a lot of the solutions might be the same with a little bit of a tweak and that sort of thing. Some key elements from just general good practice on workforce development is that we found is that collaboration and communication are critical. Partners enable, and I'll get into more of this in the later questions, but partnership enables scale and brings, allows all of our funding and all of our efforts to be greater than the sum of them individually. Adaptability is really crucial. Being able to start with smaller pilot projects or initiatives and then see what works and being able to scale those and or pivot completely. The Ukraine example is a really good one of, we had a couple years of activities and then the invasion occurred and we had to kind of pivot to work on different elements of capacity building. And then the last two are just making sure you're maintaining focus on local stakeholder engagement there, understanding the local needs, and then being able to draw lessons from those to a broader region if you're working regionally, and trying to find ways to build those kinds of kind of listening activities into your projects. And then the last part is really on measurable impact. So we're going to have in each country and in each region high-level strategies that cover a lot of different bases, cover that entire apple of cybersecurity capacity building that we're trying to address. But as we're designing each activity, really making sure that you can identify what outcomes you're trying to measure and how those tie up and roll up so that you can replicate as needed. And that way, we have limited budgets in cybersecurity capacity building in many cases. Making sure you know where the money is going is relevant to maintaining those flows of funding.
Yeah, this is, cybersecurity is such a, not anymore, but it's such a recent field of, we're very proud that we started the cybersecurity program, or the CICTE was established 20 years, not CICTE, the mandate for CICTE to work in cybersecurity was established 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, not that many people were talking about cybersecurity. For sure, when you talk to people who have been working in cybersecurity for a long time, they don't have any masters. Most of them, they don't have any masters or anything, because back in the day, they were not masters in cybersecurity, or there were very few. So this is a very new field, and there is a lot to cover. Like, we don't need to do awareness raising campaigns for people to lock their cars, because they know that it's not safe to leave their cars open. But we do need to do awareness raising campaigns for people to change their password from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So not only cybersecurity professionals, those who work in incident response teams and those who who work in policy making, but also the citizens in general have to be trained, and that is a lot to cover. So, Donavon, given your experience in the government, what are the top discussions regarding acquisition of cybersecurity talent, and what are the limitations of governments in recruiting and retaining talent? And you're going to say money. So, yeah. And that the private sector are the bad guys. sorry. I didn't mean.
Money is definitely a major consideration, right? I see Colonel Sterling sitting in the back. We've managed to do some work together in the past. That's normally a critical consideration when someone goes to the government and say, hey, we need some cybersecurity professionals. The first question is, how are we going to pay them, right? To attract them and then to retain them. So that's a very important factor. I think a part of the solution to that problem, because we want to be able to identify some wins here, is a shift in our digital appreciation, or culture around digital appreciation. If cybersecurity becomes as normal as any other skill, then the availability of those skills increases, and so we can partially deal with the issue of cybersecurity professionals being committed to especially working for the government. Many of us here work for the government. We know generally that government work doesn't really pay. But on the other end, if we aspire towards being a part of change and being a part of what matters, then that is a very, very big motivation to overcoming some of those issues. When I returned to Jamaica to serve as a data scientist at the Ministry of National Security, I gave up an offer that was significantly more than 600% higher than what I was being paid. Yeah, and I hear the snickering. And my family members, even the persons who made the offer to me, looked at me as though I'm stupid. But in that moment, I understood the importance of such a role, which is a new role in the Ministry of National Security, and I understood where my skills could play a very, very big part in that process. And so I turned down one job and took up that job, right? Suffice it to say, 2 years after, this gentleman in the front, Randy, and his team then did the reverse, right? But it's important. Finding a way to find compensation packages that attract cybersecurity professional and talent is very important. The other issue that I want to touch on is cybersecurity education, right? It's part of the conversation. How do we equip our local institutions to be able to produce and reproduce cybersecurity talent locally rather than importing them? That's very important, and that's part of the conversation. How do we get our local universities to offer quality cybersecurity education so that we can certify our locals in cybersecurity, upskill our population in cybersecurity, and also reproduce those skills locally? Because when formal cybersecurity training is only available in other countries, when you go there and you study, you might not return, and so forth, right? And the cost of that education makes it difficult for you to come back and accept a certain kind of salary. So that's very important. We also, a part of the conversation is what policies and legislations exist to clearly define cybersecurity roles that people in the workforce can aspire towards, right? I get trained and qualified in cybersecurity, but then there aren't any clear, and that's why I spoke about centralization of the cybersecurity outfit of any country, because then if I'm trained in anything related to cybersecurity, I can see a particular job that I can aspire towards, right? Because if I'm training for nothing, if I'm training just to be called an analyst in a back room somewhere, what incentive is there for me to bring my skills related to cybersecurity to the workforce that I'm a part of. And that's crucial and very important. A part of the conversation is also culture, and I'll always go back to that. The extent to which the organizational cultures, the national culture, the political culture embraces cybersecurity. That's a very, very big consideration when we talk about retaining cybersecurity talent. And it brings me into some of the limitations that governments face. The main one is the money. The other one is the thick bureaucracy of government, right? It's very, very thick.
You're
right?
getting a lot of nodding here. I don't know if just they're acknowledging that it's a lot.
I know. I think many of us feel victimized by the thick bureaucracy of government, right? And that thick bureaucracy translates into many things. One, it becomes unattractive to people who are in the tech field. People when you go to Google and Apple headquarters, the tech guys, they're in pajamas, sitting around in very, very upbeat environments, right? And when we need to get a piece of equipment for a SOC, we need it today or tomorrow, not the procurement process that takes 12 months or a year to get done, right? And it goes back to culture. We have to understand that people who study cybersecurity have a different kind of thinking, much more innovative, much more fast-paced. The thick bureaucracy does nothing for cybersecurity professionals, and so the whole system of government becomes unattractive to people who are cybersecurity leaning. Limited budgets, outdated technology in government is also one of the issues. If I am a cybersecurity professional, especially on the tech side, and I know that, okay, you are still running on Windows XP, I'm not coming to work there because I know that my job is going to be significantly more difficult, and then when whatsoever hits the fan, I am going to be blamed as a cybersecurity professional, not the person at the front desk who clicked the phishing link email that says you have won $1 million, right? It's going to be me working with outdated technology and the very, very sluggish bureaucracy that cannot get me what I need to do my work, right? As opposed to the private sector where they have holographic screens and all of that and more money, right? I'm going to work there, I have cool toys to work with, and I also have the systems to support me to do the work that I need. So government needs to be more flexible in terms of being able to absorb the talent that is present. Government needs to also, through ministries of education, facilitate a posture that puts cybersecurity education on the front burner, right? And I have nothing against the people who study liberal studies and all of those things, but in upskilling our population, we need to divert funding, and that's one of the problems, and the views expressed here are my own personal views. When we look at our regional universities, where governments push the same amount of funding to someone studying liberal studies as opposed to someone in the STEM field, there needs to be some conversation around how do we refocus investment in education so that we put some priority on STEM fields, cybersecurity and so forth, so that we can participate in upskilling or population. So those are some of the challenges that governments, and I think I've covered most of them, right? Those are some of the challenges that governments face in attracting the talent and keeping the talent so that we can reproduce it and create the kind of societies that we want.
Yeah, you've covered quite a lot, and I'm writing down some takeaways. I'm writing government, stop being bureaucratic, stop being boring, and please let us go to work in pajamas. I think if I summarize this correctly.
Thank you. I love it.
No, it is.
I'm sorry.
That's cool, thank you.
Great. But yeah, what I liked about your speech is that we need to think innovatively. It's not all about money, and especially these days where people are maybe looking after other things. Money, of course, is important, but I don't know, work remotely or and more flexibility, ownership, that is important. I don't know, but yeah, there's many lessons learned that we can learn from that. I will switch to Spanish again. Nataly, ¿cuáles son esos biases que tenemos cuando a la hora de reclutar personal? ¿Qué problemas técnicos, incluidos el lenguaje inclusivo o los conceptos, seguimos viendo en procesos de reclutamiento? No sé si tienes algún consejo para los equipos de recursos humanos a la hora de cuando están haciendo un proceso de selección o cuando publican alguna vacante.
Sí. Sí, bueno, primero me encantó lo que decía Novat y quiero conectarlo un poco con la pregunta. A ver, yo trabajé y estudié todo público, entonces de gobierno, de hecho 5 años haciendo un postdoctorado en el Barcelona Supercomputing Center, que es un centro público de tecnología, inteligencia artificial aplicada justamente a salud, cambio climático y desarrollo tecnológico. Entonces, el principal problema que tenía este centro es que todos los perfiles eran puramente de inteligencia artificial, computer scientist, y atraerlos a este centro era muy difícil por el dinero, ¿no? Porque tenemos empresas en Barcelona o alrededor del mundo, Google, etc. Ahora estamos en este mundo conectado donde no solamente estamos compitiendo las empresas gubernamentales con las industrias locales, sino con Google, con Microsoft, etc. Y los salarios que ya no son locales, sino internacionales. Y eso es otro problema, porque salarios de Barcelona son más bajos que los de Finlandia. Entonces, ahí también hay varias cosas. Entonces, una cosa que estoy totalmente de acuerdo y que siempre digo a las personas de recursos humanos que tienen que tener en cuenta es el salario emocional, ¿no? El salario este que decía Donavon de la cultura. Es decir, ¿por qué la gente estaba en el BCC, en el centro que yo estaba? Porque aportaba a la sociedad, tenía tópicos públicos donde vos estás por el sentimiento de estar buscando un mundo mejor. Y eso a veces las empresas privadas no te lo dan tan fácilmente, porque vos estás vendiendo un producto o desarrollando algo para el private sector y perdés lo que es la emoción o el compromiso social. Entonces, cuando hablamos de cultura, como bien decía, tenemos que potenciar. Estás en el gobierno, sí, vas a tener muchas cosas burocráticas, sí, pero vas a llegar a tu casa y te vas a sentir mejor, que estás contribuyendo a un mundo mejor. Que eso lo privado a veces no lo da tan fácilmente. No digo que todo lo privado sea negativo, no. Obviamente que hay muchas empresas que tienen esta potencialidad de compromiso social. Pero bueno, por un lado es eso, potenciar en las empresas todo lo emocional, todo lo que es compromiso social, para atraer también a gente que está comprometida con estas causas. Después, si queremos también atraer la diversidad, no alcanza con poner la frase en las job offer, digamos, de esta empresa está comprometida con los derechos humanos, diversidad, y al final, ¿no? Esto tiene que estar en toda la job offer, como expresando nuestro compromiso, para atraer también a determinadas personas. Hay una aplicación que está para inglés, se llama Gender Decoder, yo la recomiendo, es una web que tú entras y pegas, digamos, la job offer y te dice qué palabras están asociadas con perfiles más masculinos o femeninos. Y eso es muy útil porque automáticamente nos da palabras como, por ejemplo, con masculino está como aggressive, impulsive, active, y con feminine, por ejemplo, emotion, enthusiastic, inclusive. Son palabras que una u otra persona, géneros, nos sentimos más identificados o no. Entonces, una recomendación es tener en cuenta este lenguaje inclusivo. En inglés es más fácil porque el inglés es más neutro, ¿vale? Entonces, hay que ver más que nada los conceptos, estas palabras. En español tenemos problemas, de hecho los famosos problemas de Google Translator, con que si ponías the doctor, te ponía el doctor, ya asumía que era masculino, ¿no? Entonces, ahí yo lo que recomiendo y lo que hablaba con recursos humanos es que en mi centro, cuando alguien ingresaba, le ponían bienvenido o bienvenida. Y a veces había nombres que no sabían. En francés hay nombres que incluso yo no distingo con solamente ver el nombre qué género es. Y además estamos pudiendo ofender a una persona, porque no por el nombre es como vos te quieras hacer llamar. Entonces yo decía, qué fácil es cambiar y en vez de poner bienvenido, bienvenida, es te damos la bienvenida. Te damos la bienvenida. In Spanish maybe the translation is difficult, but it's neutral, te damos la bienvenida. Entonces hay que buscar o hablar de personas, agradecer a todas las personas que están presentes. No es necesario decir las señoras, los señores. Es decir, hay muchas cosas en el lenguaje que con un breve pensar cómo hacerlo más inclusivo podemos ayudar a que la gente se postule a nuestros puestos. Entonces, las job offers son muy importantes tenerlas en cuenta, desde los conceptos, las palabras y los valores que damos. Y como decía Donavon, expresar también esto. Damos flexibilidad, potenciamos el impacto social. Es decir, hay que atraer a las personas no solamente por el dinero, sino por toda esta cultura que está en el día a día. Y bueno, no sé, para también sumar, creo que es importante en las empresas tener un buen ambiente. Hay un informe que no es muy positivo, que dice que un 51% del área de ciberseguridad, mujeres, denunciaron discriminación. ¿Vale? Los puedo compartir después, este informe. No puede ser que haya 51% que dicen que sufrieron discriminación. Entonces, ahí obviamente uno se va. Digamos, no importa qué dinero tenga. Entonces, tener protocolos, estar atentos y no callarnos si vemos algún acto discriminatorio, sea de género, sea cultural, sea de lo que sea. En mi trabajo eran 56 nacionalidades y había muchos problemas de cultura y religiosos, ¿vale? Porque había gente musulmana, gente cristiana, etc. Entonces, tener protocolos y tener ojos en el día a día, eso también va a potenciar, digamos, la mano, digamos, el ambiente, el trabajo y la eficiencia. Así que son recomendaciones.
Me gusta la parte de tu respuesta, tiene mucho que ver, y en este panel estamos viendo muchas respuestas que tienen que ver con la imaginación. Hay que ser imaginativos en el tema de, a la hora de publicar una oferta o a la hora de utilizar el lenguaje inclusivo, pues no seas pesados. Es verdad que hay mucha gente que tiene mucha resistencia, sobre todo, de nuevo, en el español. No es que no voy a poner estimado, estimada, bienvenido, bienvenida todo el rato, porque entonces mandaría un email de 3 páginas. Bueno, dale la vuelta.
Exacto.
Dale la vuelta. Entonces, tienes que hacer un pequeño esfuerzo, pero ya te voy a quitar la excusa de que no, es que es muy pesado, no es que sería muy largo. No, no es tan largo. Lo único que tienes que hacer es pensar un poco más. Y eso, bueno, cómo lo has ligado a las respuestas de Donavon de antes, me gustaría rescatar lo que has hablado de la fuerza laboral. Este nuevo conjunto de personas que están integrando la fuerza laboral, los millennials, bueno, yo ya me he perdido en las generaciones, pero nosotros sacamos un reporte de desarrollo de fuerza laboral en la OEA el año pasado. Y decía eso, que las nuevas generaciones ya tienen otros incentivos aparte del dinero y no es solo trabajar remotamente, no es solo la flexibilidad, sino es tener trabajos en los que sientan que pueden hacer algo por la sociedad, que puedan aportar algo que trascienda, que están contribuyendo a hacer un mundo mejor. Y todo esto está siendo parte y está siendo importante en esta generación que es la que se está incorporando ahora al mundo laboral en ciberseguridad y en otros aspectos. I'd like to switch again to English. I would like to ask Maurice. We've been speaking about partnership, collaboration. I think every other panel in these 2 days have been spoken about collaboration. So, given your role in expanding USAID partnership in cybersecurity space globally, can you please let us know the importance of collaboration and cross-sector engagement in workforce development initiatives and maybe some examples of best practices?
Sure. Thanks, David. So, again, speaking about this from USAID's perspective is one thing, and hopefully this is helpful to member states that are here in terms of as you're engaging with the World Bank, with the USAID, with the EU. Whoever it is, donor partners that you have, just recognizing that collaboration is probably for me at least, within cybersecurity, both collaboration on your local projects, but then regionally is the most important element, I think, to a successful project. And that is primarily because cybersecurity is so cross-cutting, but not just across sectors, but also within, a region. It's not quite the same as other sectors where you may be able to focus on workforce development and other subject matter within a given sector. Here, the cybersecurity of one country can suffer from ripple effects from other countries. A lot of the malign actors are, cross-national or non-national. And so finding ways to collaborate on workforce development in a regional way is really crucial. The other thing collaboration does is unlock regionally additional resources. So like from a donor perspective, we have, however many missions in the Caribbean. Each one has their own budget. That budget is then subdivided between however many different sectors they're working in, leaving some maybe for cybersecurity capacity building, some of which might be workforce development. Regionally, they may be able to tap into additional pots of money, additional resources, or find ways to build a project that works in 3 different countries at the same time and kind of creates savings that way, which is really critical. And so all of that is just one element of why I think collaboration is really important. There are some interesting examples. For example, our cybersecurity for critical infrastructure project in Ukraine. It's just one country where it's focused for the most part, but it's got, who knows how many donors working on it collaboratively, and it's got 40 different private sector partners all contributing resources and time and effort. That's a very special circumstance where there's, a war going on, there was an invasion, and having to collect all those different partners together to collaborate is kind of the only way to meet that challenge. In other contexts where there's not as sort of urgent circumstances, for me, it's really just about finding kind of one cornerstone partner, whether it's a specific ministry or kind of flag bearer within partner government, one other donor. So if I'm viewing this from a USAID perspective, I'll try to find one other donor that we can really bring into the fold to work together with, one private sector partner, both locally and internationally, and then sort of a civil society partner as well, and make sure that all of those are brought in to talk about this activity and kind of own it together. I think that's just sort of a good baseline. We can then reach back into the whole host of other U.S. government and other partner government agencies for resources. Our program in the Philippines does that really well, where they're working with NICE and NIST, DHS, all those different groups. And that adds a whole other layer of collaboration. In terms of challenges and what makes that hard or more difficult is the objectives amongst all of those different stakeholders vary, right? And again, that's kind of one of the critical elements of cybersecurity that makes it unique, is that while the risks and challenges are shared regionally, the political objectives, geopolitical objectives, aspects of that, what everybody's trying to achieve within a region, within a country, are also really diverse. And so finding ways to put those aside sometimes and focus on the kind of the regional or country level development is important. And that's one of the things that I think USAID balances back and forth is, as a development organization, we are very much focused on the kind of well-being and strengthening of the local context, but at the same time, we're part of the U.S. national security structure, and so U.S. national security community, and so we have to be, have that in the back of our mind, that as we're working with a given country on cybersecurity, what does that mean? Otherwise, I think there's, it's always interesting as you're collaborating within, and so think about this within a country versus within a region. You have ministries and partners that have a role to play in workforce development, but aren't thinking about cybersecurity workforce development and trying to convince them that they're part of the team and need to be involved in that. I think that's a huge barrier that can be its whole own project, right? How do I convince my Ministry of Education that, okay, great, you need to now be investing in cybersecurity post-secondary education? That's a whole other project. And then lastly, I think is related is, once you get into regional collaboration is just the different regulatory, legal frameworks and that sort of thing on data management, on privacy, on labor rules, all that kind of stuff that will prevent one solution from working in one place but not working in another. So, communicate is really the most important part. Finding ways to communicate across all those partners as regularly as possible is something that we as donors can, I think, do a better job of.
Totally. Communication is key. When we're facing when we get a request for technical assistance in a country, it is very important, like us, what we do well. Who are you working with? What is your need? Are we the best to respond to your needs? If not, we happily pass the ball to someone else who is in a better need. Like, as I said before, cybersecurity is a kind of recent and new field. It has many disadvantages, but one of the advantages is that we pretty much know each other. We know all of us. We're here. We're not that many, especially in the region. So I think that make it possible for us to coordinate better among at least international agencies and more among governments. I've seen a lot of engagement from the audience. I've seen a lot of nodding, laughing, even some applauding. So I would like to open the floor for the audience in case someone has a question. I'm going to go first with one or two more questions, but if someone wants to ask a question, please let us know. We're getting towards the end of this panel. But before that, Donavon, I would like to go back to you and ask you, what workforce development initiative have you seen as the most successful across the region, and what lessons learned can we take from them?
So if we think about workforce development in two tranches, one proactive and one reactive, right? Think about already having a workforce that is not yet upskilled. And so we have to develop that workforce in terms of cybersecurity. That means we're being a bit reactive in that sense. And what I have seen work is where companies, organizations support staff to get cybersecurity training. And when I say support, it's support where funding is concerned. Mm-hmm. Sending staff to get training. And the kind of training that is most attractive in that sense are short training, certification programs that does not require too much commitment on the part of the employee of the organization or the member of the workforce. Because most of us who are in cybersecurity today never started with formal cybersecurity education. We never went and got a degree in cybersecurity. We upskilled later on, and so we need to offer that opportunity to the current workforce to be able to get short certification in cybersecurity, right? That I find helps, right? It's attractive. People think of expanding their resumes as well as becoming more cyber compliant with their organization. Internships also work, and internships work in both ways. We can get an intern who has never, and this is a more proactive kind of engagement. It's both proactive and reactive. We can take a student from a university who is in that realm of cybersecurity or who isn't even in that realm of cybersecurity and place them in an organization that is focused predominantly in cyber. The end goal is that that student becomes better trained and prepared in cybersecurity and become a part of the workforce. Or the other way around, you can take a student who is very skilled in cybersecurity and place them in an organization that does not have a robust cybersecurity system and allow them to bring their skills to that organization. And I've seen where that worked in a few cases in the region where master students, even undergraduate students who work as interns in organizations that are not very cyber mature and help them towards maturity. Very importantly, in terms of proactively building your workforce to be cyber competent, we need to start consider including cybersecurity, digitalization in curriculum from a very, very early age, right? It can't be that when we get to being employed, that's when someone is telling us, don't click on the phishing email, right? It should be something that is ingrained in education systems from as early childhood education, of course with the appropriate dosage, right? We're not asking babies to go and code, but with the appropriate dosage, we can get our population and essentially our workforce to be more cyber competent, and overall the culture will improve where cybersecurity is concerned. And competitions, it may seem like a low-hanging fruit, but competitions drive interest. Ethical hacking competitions and so forth drive interests in the area, and overall and over time increase competence. So from that reactive standpoint, my view is build the cyber competence of your population, and essentially your workforce will become cyber competent. If we only focus on particular people in the workforce to be trained or to improve their cyber competence, we'll never get where we want to go, ever. Because those people sometimes fall out of the organization and the talent leaves with them. But when we build national appreciation of why it's important to be cyber competent and practice proper cyber hygiene, those simple things, then over time our entire population will build in cybersecurity competence.
Yeah, so it's more like go to massive and build cybersecurity skills, cybersecurity education, cybersecurity awareness. So those are the key initiatives or the more successful initiatives that you've spoken about. Maurice, how about with your experience? What are the Can you share some specific challenges that you have encountered when implementing cybersecurity capacity building initiatives or workforce development initiatives?
Sure. So, and this is building, Donovan, on the points you were just making, I think, in terms of kind of, I think you said reactive and proactive. You could look at it as direct versus indirect, or like light touch versus heavy touch as well, in terms of interventions. You could also think about it like in terms of almost like a stock portfolio or an investment portfolio, right? You've got your short-term, I really want to target this right now to make sure that this is happening because we have this critical need, and I think that ties into, taking a risk analytical perspective on how you're targeting your investments versus the longer-term investment in the overall workforce and digital hygiene for the entire society. You need to invest in both, but how much and where, and thinking about how to do that is really difficult. An example in terms of addressing something like brain drain, right? We've talked about that. It's difficult to be able to retain cybersecurity expertise within government agencies, but then also, depending on where you are, also within the private sector. There are, some interesting examples from USAID's work in terms of taking those kinds of direct or indirect or big picture, little picture things that you can kind of set apart from each other. So the Beacon program in the Philippines, on the one hand, identified kind of appropriateness of certifications as being a key challenge for Filipino cybersecurity experts. And they worked with ISC Squared to develop to kind of tweak their certifications a little bit, make them more affordable or accessible, and provide resources for existing experts to be able to then further their professional development with the interest of retaining them in the industry. At the same time, as they are working on expanding the cybersecurity workforce and creating a more kind of gender equitable workforce and more inclusive workforce, they recognize, because Beacon is a digital transformation project as well, that the kind of hiring and HR practices amongst government agencies did not necessarily create welcoming environments. So you may have a workforce that's ready to go, but they get there and all of a sudden the work environment that they're in, even if they're doing the technical thing that they want to do, is not somewhere where they want to be. Whether or not the money could be great, but if it's a toxic environment or something like that, they didn't want to be part of that. And so they emphasized building gender equitable, gender inclusive frameworks into government agencies at that point, even if it wasn't focused just on cybersecurity, but they recognized that that was a huge barrier. And so, just trying to be holistic as you're going through that is really important. I'll try to see if there's anything else. I think that's good for now, just because we're still on time.
Thank you.
Me gustaría agregar, si puedo.
Por supuesto.
Sí, me gustaría agregar que con lo que estabas diciendo que particularmente una vez que tenemos a las personas, si logramos la diversidad o género en nuestros equipos, hay que considerar ciertas características de las personalidades que se han comprobado. Por ejemplo, hay un estudio del Parlamento alemán donde mira el tiempo de participación e interrupción de hombres y mujeres. Y se ha comprobado que las mujeres tenemos menos tiempo para hablar y más interrupciones. ¿Vale? También hay un estudio de Open Society de Estados Unidos que miró muchas conferencias y comprobó que los hombres son los primeros que preguntan en las conferencias y también los que más participan. Entonces, teniendo estos patrones, podemos adelantarnos y potenciar, por ejemplo, una de las recomendaciones también que se hace a los equipos, y lo hago a Cybersecurity o a Teams o lo que sea, es considerando que hay personas que hablan menos, es decir, las mujeres que hablan menos o participan menos y tienen menos tiempo para hablar, como managers, digamos, tenemos que potenciar todo esto, entonces para darle más voz también. Entonces eso es como para agregar, además de tener esta cultura, una vez que la tengamos, tenemos que considerar las diferencias y los problemas que hay y de nosotros salir para dar más voz o más responsabilidad o más participación considerando esto. Es una recomendación que creo que es positiva tenerla.
Me parece muy interesante tener, partimos de la base de una realidad y esa realidad que queremos cambiar, pues hay que poner a lo mejor medidas de nuestra parte, a lo mejor un poco forzando la máquina, pero yo creo que, o según tú, creo que finalmente tendrán ese impacto de que en algún momento en el futuro no tengamos que hacer ese tipo de medidas porque las intervenciones serán más igualitarias, las interrupciones no serán tanto desde un lado hacia el otro, y yo creo que es muy interesante y muy bien complementado a la explicación de Maurice. I think we have one question, if I'm right. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? My name is Carmen Jimenez. I represent a non-for-profit corporation called USAID Refugees and Immigrants. First of all, I would like to invite all of you to applaud and make an applause, a standing applause to Ms. Pretel. Ms. Pretel, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this amazing, making this possible. We are really, really grateful. Thank you so much. But in order to help the people that I have here in the media, in the social media now alive, understand what I'm going to say, I prefer to switch to Spanish if you don't mind. Bueno, para nosotros como Sociedad Civil de las Américas, es muy importante no solamente agradecerles a ustedes por esta maravillosa, y a Miss Pretel y a su equipo, Mariana y todos, con esta maravillosa exposición de cada uno de ustedes que ha sido mágica y ha sido un encuentro maravilloso para la sociedad civil de las Américas y los actores sociales. Yo simplemente quiero ayudar, colaborar, queremos ser un factor de apoyo a estas iniciativas increíbles de CICTE, una vez más felicitando a Miss Pretel por esta iniciativa y a todas las organizaciones de la Organización de Estados Americanos y direcciones, así como los países que nos han invitado a esta recepción maravillosa. Pero hay dos puntos que nos gustaría incluir o que ustedes tomaran en cuenta y consideración para las próximas ediciones. Por un lado, la opinión y la exposición de la sociedad civil como panelistas, porque somos los factores que estamos en continuo comunicación con la sociedad, con las personas de a pie, que son las que en realidad tienen esas necesidades que hoy en día ustedes, grandiosos panelistas, vienen a llenar. Pero también, y a pesar de que sabemos que muchos de ustedes son representantes de personas elegidas legítimamente en elecciones justas y firmes, también quisiéramos tener, quisiera que hubiese habido uno o varios panelistas oficiales electos que estén comprometidos con el futuro de nuestras ciudades, el futuro de nuestros países y quieran hacer alianzas con todas estas organizaciones maravillosas, USAID, la Organización de Estados Americanos, el Florida International University y todas las universidades y profesores que han estado aquí enseñándonos. Me siento privilegiada. Gracias.
Muchas gracias por su intervención. Tratamos siempre desde tanto la organización de los Estados americanos como nuestra contrapartida dentro del gobierno de Bahamas. Hemos intentado conformar un simposio con una diversidad de opiniones, con una diversidad de instituciones. A lo mejor ha faltado más protagonismo de la sociedad civil o de gobiernos o de academia. Hemos intentado hacer lo mejor que hemos podido y seguro tendremos en cuenta su opinión para próximas ediciones, que esperamos que sean tan exitosas como esta. I would like to thank my esteemed panelists in this panel. I don't know if any final recommendation, but I think we kind of run out of time. So thank you very much for a very insightful conversation, and I give the word to Coron.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.